The rain against the plate glass windows of the Latnite office tower does not fall in clean. Distinct drops it smears into long, distorted streaks of grey, warping the cold neon grids of the city below into a trembling maze of scattered light. Inside, the climate-controlled air carries a faint, synthetic hum, the omnipresent respiration of servers, cooling fans, and hidden ventilation shafts that completely isolates us from the wild, unmeasured rhythm of the earth outside. We sit with our shoulders slightly raised, a posture so familiar we no longer even register it as a defense mechanism, while our fingers execute a flawless, rapid dance across mechanical keyboards. Every click is precise, every response is optimized, and every outbound message is carefully calibrated to project an image of absolute competence, authority, and unshakable control. We have spent decades mastering the art of the presentation, refining our public facades until they are as smooth and impenetrable as polished marble. Yet beneath the surface of this hyper-efficient existence, something is beginning to give way. It is not a sudden, dramatic shattering, but rather a slow, silent, microscopic fracturing that occurs in the quiet spaces between our achievements. A faint and unsettling murmur that asks whether the life we have constructed with such immense effort is actually ours to live, or if we have merely built a beautifully decorated cage and mistaken it for a kingdom. We look around at our colleagues, our peers, and our friends, observing the seamless manner in which they navigate the demands of a hyper-connected world, and we silently agree to participate in a collective conspiracy of silence. We look at their curated profiles, their professional accolades, and their relentless drive for self-optimization, and we tell ourselves that everyone else has cracked the code of modern existence. We see them waking up at dawn to squeeze in high-intensity workouts before managing multi-million-dollar budgets, attending mindfulness retreats on long weekends only to return to the corporate arena with even greater velocity. And we wonder why the same routines leave us feeling strangely hollow, as though we are ghosts haunting our own biographies. We have weaponized the very tools of wellness and personal development, turning meditation into a productivity hack and self-care into another metric to be tracked, measured, and maximized. We have convinced ourselves that if we can just optimize our sleep cycles, balance our neurochemistry, and streamline our daily schedules, we will finally earn the right to feel safe, accepted, and fundamentally enough. Yet, no matter how many milestones we cross, the baseline of our internal reality remains stubbornly unchanged. We are still running on a treadmill that moves faster with every step we take, driven by an unspoken, terrifying suspicion that if we ever dare to slow down, the entire elaborate structure of our lives will come crashing down around us. This is the hidden tax of our performative excellence, a structural fatigue that manifests not as a spectacular failure, but as a dull, persistent ache situated exactly 3 inches beneath the sternum. It is a weight that does not belong to the physical body, yet it dictates how we breathe, how we move, and how we encounter the world. When we sit in traffic or wait for an elevator, we feel an immediate, almost compulsive urge to pull out our phones, to immerse our minds in a fresh torrent of data, notifications, and digital noise. Because the alternative, sitting quietly with the unedited texture of our own immediate experience, has become utterly intolerable. The silence is no longer a sanctuary, it has become a mirror that reflects an image we are not yet ready to look at. In that brief, unfilled pause between tasks, the momentum of our striving drops away for a split second, and in that gap we catch a glimpse of a profound existential weariness that cannot be cured by a vacation, a promotion, or a temporary digital detox. It is the exhaustion of an identity that has been sustained entirely through external validation, an identity that must be continuously performed, defended, and rebuilt from scratch every single morning. We have become masters of the external landscape, engineering our environments to provide maximum comfort predictability, and efficiency. Yet we remain completely illiterate regarding the internal terrain of our own somatic experience. We can analyze market trends, optimize software architecture, and manage complex social dynamics with effortless grace, but we do not know what to do with the sudden irrational knot of anxiety that tightens in our stomachs during an ordinary afternoon meeting. We do not know how to hold the sudden wave of grief that washes over us when we look out the window at a darkening sky, or the profound sense of isolation that can overtake us, even when we are surrounded by a crowd of people who love and admire us. Because our culture offers no meaningful vocabulary for these subtle, non-linear currents of human feeling, we treat them as technical glitches to be bypassed, emotional errors to be overridden by sheer force of will. We tighten our jaws, we swallow the rising lump in our throats, we take a shallow, bracing breath into the upper chest, and we force ourselves back into the arena of action, completely unaware that every emotion we refuse to feel does not disappear. It simply migrates deeper into the cellular architecture of the body, waiting for the moment when the system can no longer bear the strain of its containment. This collective condition is the starting point of our journey together tonight. An entry into the quiet, unvarnished truth of what it means to be alive and human in an age of perpetual acceleration. We are not here to learn a new technique for self-improvement, nor are we here to acquire a more sophisticated set of intellectual concepts to store in the archives of the mind. Instead, we are here to slow the engine down, to allow the dust of our frantic activity to settle, and to begin the delicate, honest work of somatic diagnosis. We must find the courage to step off the stage of our public performances and enter the dimly lit backstage of our private realities, where the masks we wear are laid aside and the raw, unedited truth of our vulnerability can finally be met with an unblinking, compassionate gaze. It is only by willing to look directly at the specific nature of our confinement that we can begin to discover the coordinates of our liberation. We must move past the abstract theories of happiness and success, and instead learn to listen to the immediate physical language of our suffering, the tight muscles, the restricted breath, the heavy heart, because these are not signs that we are broken. They are the oldest, most reliable guideposts we possess, pointing us back toward a forgotten path of wholeness that we abandoned long ago in our pursuit of an impossible perfection. As we allow our bodies to settle into the stillness of this room, letting the weight of our bones sink deeply into the support beneath us, we can begin to notice the subtle discrepancy between the world we project and the world we actually inhabit. We can hear the distant, muffled roar of city traffic, a reminder of the relentless machine that demands our participation, but we can also choose to bring our awareness closer to home, right to the boundary of our own skin. We can feel the cool air entering our nostrils and the slightly warmer air leaving our lips, a simple, unadorned biological reality that requires absolutely no effort, no strategy, and no performance to maintain. In this very moment, we do not have to be successful, we do not have to be strong, and we do not have to have anything figured out. We can simply allow ourselves to be as we are, carrying whatever exhaustion, doubt, or unspoken sorrow we have brought with us across the threshold. The rain will continue to fall outside, the city will continue its chaotic dance, and the demands of tomorrow will still be waiting for us when the sun rises. But for the next hour, we are granting ourselves the rare and radical permission to drop the shield, to step out of the armor, and to examine the profound structural cost of trying to hold the world together with an open hand that has forgotten how to receive. To observe this hidden tax in its rawest, most undeniable form, we must turn our attention to an archetype that defines our contemporary era. The individual who functions perfectly while silently coming undone. We might call this collective persona the pillar of the community, the high-performing professional. the reliable anchor upon whom an entire ecosystem of family, colleagues and friends depends. From the outside, their life is a masterclass in structural integrity. They arrive early, they leave late, their voice remains perfectly level during high-stakes negotiations, and their household runs with the clockwork precision of a Swiss timepiece. When crisis strikes, they do not weep, they organize. When others falter, they step forward to absorb the impact. They are celebrated by society as the gold standard of resilience, the very definition of what it means to be successful, capable, and emotionally invulnerable. Yet if we look closer, bypassing the polished glaze of this public presentation, we begin to notice the heavy, invisible armor they are forced to wear every single second of the day just to keep that immaculate image from shattering into dust. The armor does not announce itself with the clanking of metal, but with the quiet, chronic tightening of the physical body. If we examine our own physical structures during a demanding day, we can trace the precise geography of this defensive fortification. It begins in the masseter muscles of the jaw, where we grind our teeth in our sleep, compressing the bone with a force that speaks of unexpressed anger and unspoken exhaustion. It moves upward into the eyes, where the gaze is perpetually locked in a hard, hypervigilant focus, scanning the horizon for the next threat, the next task, the next potential failure. We notice it in the shoulders, which are raised just a fraction of an inch too high, drawn up toward the ears in an instinctive, primitive reflex to protect the vulnerable carotid arteries from a phantom predator. The chest is held rigid, an iron ribcage designed to prevent the heart from expanding too far, restricting our respiration to shallow, rapid gasps that take place exclusively in the upper clavicular region. This shallow breathing keeps our sympathetic nervous system perpetually redlined, flooding our tissues with a slow, continuous drip of cortisol and adrenaline, ensuring that even when we are resting, our biology believes we are fighting for our very survival in an unforgiving wilderness. Beneath this physical armor lies a profound psychological weight, a cold, dense mass situated exactly 3 inches beneath the sternum that acts as the emotional gravity of the high-functioning individual. This is the structural core of the hollow clay statue. Imagine a vessel that has been fired in a high-temperature kiln, its exterior coated in an exquisite, glass-like glaze, decorated with intricate patterns of gold leaf and vibrant crimson pigments that draw the admiration of everyone who passes by. To the casual observer, the statue appears solid, permanent, and immensely valuable. But if you were to drill a tiny hole through that beautiful painted glaze, you would discover that the interior is not solid stone, nor is it tempered bronze. It is filled entirely with loose, unbaked, shifting dry sand mixed with pockets of trapped, stagnant water. The water, unable to escape through the non-porous glaze, is slowly and systematically eroding the internal clay walls, dissolving the structural integrity of the statue from the inside out. The sand is shifting with every external vibration, creating hidden caverns and structural faults beneath the beautiful surface. This is the terrifying reality of high-functioning depression. The energy required to maintain the external glaze is exponentially greater than the energy available to sustain the internal life. We must wake up every morning and manually assemble our faces in the bathroom mirror, painting on the smile, adjusting the tone of voice, and stepping out into the world as a fully formed monument of competence, while internally we feel like a pile of loose sand that could be scattered by a single gust of wind. The tragedy of this condition is that our very success becomes our prison. Because we perform so well, no one suspects that we are drowning. When we drop a hint about our exhaustion, people laugh and say that a person as strong as we are will always find a way to get through it. When we confess to feeling empty, they point to our achievements, our beautiful homes, or our loving relationships as proof that our pain is irrational, ungrateful, or imaginary. We are trapped in a feedback loop where our external perfection invalidates our internal suffering, forcing us to retreat deeper into the isolation of our own minds, hiding our fractures because we believe that showing them would mean the total forfeiture of our worth. The internal dialogue of the hollow clay statue is a relentless, exhausting tribunal. It is an unceasing voice that monitors every action, every word, and every fleeting thought, judging it against an impossible standard of absolute perfection. If we feel a moment of fatigue during the day, the voice immediately reprimands us, whispering that we are lazy, that we are slipping, and that our competitors are working while we are resting. If a wave of sadness washes over us for no apparent reason, the voice weaponizes our privileges against us, demanding to know what right we have to be unhappy when so many people in the world have so much less. We become terrified of our own humanity, viewing our ordinary biological needs for rest, space, vulnerability, and grief as dangerous structural defects that must be hidden at all costs. We develop a hyperacute sensitivity to criticism, interpreting the slightest neutral comment or minor professional setback as an existential threat, an indication that the world is about to see through our glaze and discover the fraud we believe ourselves to be. We are running on the sheer momentum of fear of being exposed, fear of letting down the people who depend on us, and fear of what would happen if the sand inside us finally gave way and the statue collapsed into a heap of formless dust on the floor. To cope with this agonizing discrepancy between the inner and the outer world, we turn to the modern sacraments of distraction and optimization. We do not turn to overt, destructive vices that would ruin our reputation. Instead, we turn to productive addictions. We overschedule our lives so that there is not a single unmonitored, unfilled 10-minute block in our entire week. We jump from the boardroom to the gym, from the gym to social obligations, and from social obligations back to our laptops late at night, ensuring that the engine of our mind is constantly running at maximum RPM. We tell ourselves that this is ambition, that this is the hustle required for greatness. But if we are entirely honest with ourselves in the dark of night, we know it is a flight from gravity. We are running as fast as we can because we know that the moment we stand completely still, the momentum of our distraction will drop to zero, and the cold, heavy weight beneath our sternum will catch up with us. We are terrified of the silence because within that silence, the shifting of the internal sand becomes audible, and we are forced to hear the quiet, weeping voice of the child inside us, who has been buried beneath decades of performance, achievements, and structural concrete, begging for permission to simply stop running, to drop the weight, and to be held in their raw, imperfect completeness without having to earn it. When the structural weight of maintaining this immaculate, hollow facade becomes too heavy to bear, the mind does not simply sit with the pain, it immediately manufactures a sophisticated internal counterattack. To understand why this internal erosion feels so devastating, we must look at the psychological mechanism that the historical awakening tradition describes with immense surgical precision. There is a classic psychological diagnostic tool found in the ancient texts, often translated into modern terms as the phenomenon of the two arrows. Imagine you are walking through a dense, mist-shrouded forest, and out of the shadows, a stray arrow flies through the air and strikes you directly in the shoulder. The initial impact is sharp, sudden, and deeply painful. This first arrow represents the raw, unedited reality of human existence. It is the unexpected market crash that wipes out your savings, the sudden ending of a relationship you thought would last forever, the biological reality of physical illness, or the simple, undeniable fact that after 40 years of intense striving, you wake up one morning and feel completely exhausted. The first arrow is the friction of a changing universe colliding with our desire for permanence. It is a biological and existential fact of being alive. But then, as we lie on the forest floor holding our bleeding shoulder, a highly unusual thing happens. We do not look for medicine. We do not call out for help. Instead, we look at the arrow, we look at our own wound, and we become filled with a cold, blinding fury. We pick up a second arrow, which we have been carrying in our own quiver all along. We place it against the string of our own bow. We point it directly at our own heart, and we release it. This second arrow is our mental reaction to the first arrow. It is the complex, highly damaging narrative that our intellect weaves around our vulnerability. The first arrow caused physical pain. The second arrow creates suffering. The second arrow is the voice that whispers into the dark of the night, declaring that if we were truly strong, if we were truly smart, if we were truly as spiritual or as competent as we pretend to be, we would never have been hit by the first arrow in the first place. For those of us trapped within the architecture of high-functioning excellence, our lives are a continuous, self-inflicted barrage of these second arrows. When the first arrow of natural emotional exhaustion hits us after a long period of overwork, we do not allow ourselves to lie down and rest. Instead, we immediately release the second arrow of self-condemnation. We tell ourselves that our fatigue is a symptom of laziness, a proof of unworthiness, or a sign that we are falling behind our peers. When the first arrow of temporary sadness or existential emptiness sweeps through our consciousnesses, it naturally does for all human beings immediately compound the agony by judging our sadness as a moral failure. We look at our successful careers, our stable bank accounts, and our beautiful relationships, and we weaponize these privileges against our own psychological reality. We tell ourselves that we have absolutely no right to feel this way, that we are being ungrateful, and that we are frauds for presenting an image of happiness to the world while feeling a cold void within. This internal judgment is far more destructive than the original exhaustion itself. It creates a state of chronic internal warfare where the ego is simultaneously the merciless prosecuting attorney, the hanging judge, and the brutalized prisoner serving a life sentence in a cell without windows. The root of this self-sabotaging mechanism lies in a profound cultural misunderstanding of what the self actually is. From the moment we enter the educational and economic systems of the modern world, we are taught to view the self as a fixed, unchanging, permanent enterprise that must be continuously optimized, defended, and expanded. We treat our identity like a corporate stock portfolio that must show quarter-over-quarter growth, an unbroken upward trajectory of productivity, emotional stability, and material achievement. We buy into the capitalist illusion that we are the sole authors and CEOs of our own destinies, and that if our internal stock price drops, if we experience a period of depression, anxiety, or deep disorientation, it is a sign of poor management, a personal defect that must be corrected through sheer force of will or sophisticated self-help protocols. The historical awakening tradition breaks through this exhausting illusion with the radical, liberating truth of impermanence and the non-existence of a fixed, permanent identity. When we examine our inner landscape through the clear, unbiased lens of sustained awareness, we discover that there is no singular permanent entity called the self that remains stable from moment to moment. Instead, what we call the self is a highly dynamic, ever-shifting river of temporary phenomena. It is an unceasing flow of physical sensations, fleeting thoughts, passing emotional currents, and transient mental states that arise into consciousness, stay for a brief period, and then dissolve back into the emptiness from which they came. To look at your mind and expect it to be permanently happy, permanently motivated, and permanently productive is as absurd as looking at the sky and demanding that it remain in a state of perpetual midday sunshine. A cloudless blue sky is a beautiful reality, but it is not a permanent state. It must inevitably give way to the grey mist of autumn rains, the dark thunderheads of summer storms, and the deep, silent stillness of a freezing winter night. The weather patterns of the atmosphere are not moral judgments on the sky. The storm does not mean the sky has failed. The winter blizzard does not mean the sky is broken or ungrateful. The storm is simply the natural, inevitable result of certain atmospheric causes and conditions coming together at a specific point in time. Yet, when the storm of sadness or high-functioning depression rolls into our internal sky, we do not treat it as weather. We treat it as an identity. We look at the dark clouds and we say, "I am the storm." We look at the grey mist of exhaustion and we say, "I am broken." We fail to realize that the part of us that is aware of the sadness, the part of us that can feel the heavy, dense weight beneath the sternum and notice the tightening of the jaw, is not itself sad. The awareness that witnesses the storm is as vast, as spacious, and as unaffected as the sky itself. The sky does not fight the storm to make it disappear. It simply provides the open, boundless space within which the storm can move, transform, and eventually pass away. By dismantling the fiction of the constant, permanently optimized self, we begin to realize that our high-functioning depression is not a sign of individual pathology, but a highly logical, intelligent rebellion of our biology against an unnatural way of living. The body, in its infinite evolutionary wisdom, realizes that the mind is running on a dangerous, unsustainable trajectory of perpetual striving. When we refuse to listen to the gentle whispers of our fatigue, when we ignore the mild tension in our shoulders and the subtle loss of joy in our daily activities, the body has no choice but to turn up the volume of its communication. It pulls the master circuit breaker. It dampens our emotional range, reduces our energy reserves, and introduces a heavy, thick layer of numbness and apathy into our experience, not to punish us, but to force us to slow down, to compel the hollow clay statue to stop its frantic, destructive dance before its foundations collapse entirely. The moment we shift our perspective from viewing our depression as an enemy to be conquered to viewing it as a wise, boundary-setting messenger, the entire architecture of our suffering begins to change. We stop firing the second arrows of self-judgment. We stop asking, "How can I fix this? How can I eliminate this? How can I get back to my hyper-optimized, performative self instead?" We learn to sit in the quiet laboratory of our own immediate experience, asking a far more profound, compassionate question. What is this exhaustion trying to protect me from? What is this cold weight beneath my sternum trying to tell me about the life I am living? By allowing the hard, brittle glaze of our perfectionism to be pierced by this radical, non-judgmental curiosity, we open the door to the practical somatic architecture of genuine structural repair, moving away from the violent effort of self-improvement and toward the gentle, spacious reality of true emotional liberation. To mend a structure that is fracturing from within, we cannot simply slap another layer of bright paint over the cracking glaze. We must dare to dissolve the very kiln that baked us into this rigid, brittle shape. The transition from a state of high-functioning exhaustion to one of genuine, fluid vitality requires that we stop treating our body as a corporate asset to be managed and begin treating it as an intelligent ecosystem to be deeply listened to. If we look closely at how we have operated for years, we see that our primary relationship with our physical self has been one of violent, top-down enforcement. We command the eyes to look at screens for 12 hours. We command the jaw to hold its tongue, and we command the chest to restrict its breath so we do not cry in public spaces. The first and most radical step in our architecture of transformation is to deliberately abandon this dictatorial posture and initiate what can only be described as a somatic reclamation, a voluntary dropping of the invisible armor we have worn for so long. This process of reclaiming our physical reality does not take place in some abstract, idealized future, but in the immediate, non-linear present, precisely where the discomfort is felt most acutely. When we sit in the quiet aftermath of our daily strivings, we must practice the profound discipline of intentionally inhabiting the ache. This means when that cold, heavy sensation manifests 3 inches beneath the sternum, or when the masseter muscles of the jaw begin to lock in anticipation of a stressful task. We do not reach for our phones, we do not swallow an over-the-counter painkiller, and we do not attempt to think our way out of the feeling. Instead, we gently shift the entire focus of our conscious awareness directly into the physical center of that density. We approach the discomfort not as a technician trying to fix a faulty machine, but as a curious explorer entering an ancient cave. We ask our awareness to map the exact contours of the pressure. Is it hot or cold? Does it vibrate, or is it a solid, unmoving block? By staying with the raw sensation for 60 seconds, without trying to change it, alter it, or escape from it, we perform a microscopic miracle. We break the automatic circuit of resistance that turns ordinary physical tension into chronic psychological suffering. As we rest our attention within these dense spaces of the body, we can begin to deploy a highly specific physiological lever to reset our overstimulated nervous system. The practice of the elongated, sovereign exhalation. Because our default state of high-functioning anxiety keeps us trapped in a pattern of shallow upper chest breathing that signals perpetual danger to the primitive, survival-driven networks of the brain, we must consciously introduce an alternative biological signal. We take a slow, soft breath in through the nose, allowing the air to drop completely past the restricted ribcage, down into the deep cavity of the belly, letting the abdomen expand naturally like a soft sail catching a gentle breeze. Then, instead of releasing the breath quickly or holding it tightly, we let it flow out through slightly parted lips in a long, continuous, unhurried stream, making sure the exhalation lasts twice as long as the inhalation. As the air leaves our lungs, we consciously invite the shoulders to drop away from the ears, letting them sink downward by a fraction of an inch, and we allow the lower jaw to hang slightly loose, creating a physical space between the upper and lower teeth. This simple, deliberate slowing of the breath acts as an immediate chemical messenger, traveling down the vagus nerve to inform the heart, the adrenal glands, and the deep tissues of the gut that the phantom predator has passed, that the war is over, and that it is finally safe to stand down from the red line of survival. Through this continuous somatic softening, we pave the way for a much larger metaphorical transformation. We allow the hard, brittle exterior of our clay statue to break open completely. For the high-achieving individual, the idea of breaking open is often viewed as the ultimate catastrophe, the definition of a nervous breakdown or a humiliating public failure. But in the architecture of awakening, this shattering is recognized not as destruction, but as a necessary, life-saving deconstruction. We must realize that the pain we feel is not the pain of our true self dying. It is the pain of the rigid, painted mask being peeled away from our skin. When the outer glaze cracks, the dry sand that was trapped inside unexpressed grief, the unacknowledged fatigue, the buried loneliness finally allowed to spill out onto the earth. We stop trying to hold ourselves together as a static monument, and we allow ourselves to become messy, fluid, and beautifully unformed. We discover that we do not die when the statue breaks. Instead, we are liberated from the exhausting requirement of having to stand perfectly still on a pedestal, waiting for the world to admire our symmetry while we rot from within. To support this breaking open, we must introduce into our daily lives the radical practice of non-striving, a discipline that runs entirely counter to every tenet of our modern, hyper-optimized culture. For those of us who measure our worth by the density of our calendars and the length of our to-do lists, non-striving is perhaps most difficult discipline of all. It requires that we intentionally design empty spaces within our day spaces that are not dedicated to learning a new skill, listening to an educational podcast, or tracking our fitness metrics. It means setting aside 20 minutes where we sit on a chair or lie on the floor with absolutely no agenda other than to witness the passing weather of our minds. When we do this, the internal prosecuting attorney will inevitably arrive, screaming that we are wasting time, that we are becoming irrelevant, and that we are falling behind. Our practice is to notice this screaming without joining the argument. We let the anxious thoughts drift across the sky of our awareness like dark, ragged clouds, while we anchor ourselves over and over again in the simple sensory reality of the weight of our body pressing into the earth. We learn to sit with the deep discomfort of doing nothing, understanding that in this apparent emptiness, the deep, exhausted reservoirs of our nervous system are finally being allowed to replenish themselves outside the marketplace of achievement. This non-striving must be accompanied by the application of radical self-compassion, which acts as a structural concrete, sealing the fractures within our psyche with a gold-like resilience. Radical self-compassion is not a soft, sentimental indulgence. It is a fierce, courageous attitude of mind that completely refuses to participate in the self-inflicted violence of the second arrow. It is the moment when we look at our own exhaustion, our own sadness, or our own perceived failures, and instead of asking, "What is wrong with me?" we say to ourselves, "Of course you feel this way. Of course you are tired. You have been carrying a heavy, hollow monument on your shoulders for 20 years. Of course you feel empty. You have been feeding everyone else from a vessel that you forgot to fill." We replace the sharp, biting tone of our internal critic with a spacious, non-judgmental awareness that allows all emotional textures to exist simultaneously. We allow ourselves to be simultaneously highly capable and deeply tired. We allow ourselves to be successful professionals who also need to lie down on the floor and weep for no clear reason. We stop classifying our emotions into good and bad, productive and unproductive, and we begin to welcome them as temporary guests in the vast, open guest house of our being. As we cultivate this capacity to hold our vulnerability without judgment, we notice a profound shift in the very nature of our internal discipline. We move away from a discipline based on fear, shame, and the threat of unworthiness, and we move toward a discipline based on deep, reverent self-preservation. We no longer force ourselves to work through the night because we are afraid of being exposed as a fraud instead. We choose to close the laptop and sleep because we respect the biological temple that houses our consciousness. We no longer say yes to every external demand out of a desperate need to please others. We learn to say a clear, compassionate no, recognizing that setting a healthy boundary is an act of supreme kindness both to ourselves and to the world. This new discipline does not make us less effective or less creative, on the contrary. Because we are no longer wasting enormous amounts of psychic energy on maintaining a performative glaze and fighting our internal weather, our actions become clean, precise, and immensely powerful. We stop leaking our life force into the sand of perpetual validation, and we begin to channel it into actions that are deeply aligned with our true values, moving through the world with the unhurried, irresistible momentum of a deep river that knows exactly where it is going. As these movements of conscious, self-preserving discipline become the deep and silent foundation of our everyday existence, a quiet revolution takes place within the very fiber of our being. We begin to look out at the same concrete cityscapes, the same incoming streams of digital data, and heavy professional demands, but we no longer see them through the frantic, terror-driven eyes of the prisoner. The transition is complete. We have stepped down from the pedestal of the hollow clay statue and emerged as a fully realized, permeable vessel. To live as a permeable vessel means that we no longer construct our lives around the impossible goal of absolute invulnerability. We no longer treat our hearts as delicate, brittle porcelain that must be protected behind iron gates and painted smiles. Instead, We become like an open window in an ancient forest, or a vast clear net suspended in the open sea, allowing the full complexity of human experience to flow completely through us without meeting any rigid barriers that would cause a structural fracture. In this new state of consciousness, an unshakable and radically grounded peace becomes our primary baseline reality. This peace is entirely different from the shallow, fragile happiness we used to chase in the marketplace of achievement. It does not depend on everything in our lives going perfectly, nor does it require the continuous applause of our peers. It is a quiet, oceanic confidence born from the lived realization that we can experience intense fatigue without declaring ourselves broken, that we can feel a deep wave of temporary sadness without firing the second arrow of self-condemnation, and that we can encounter the vast, unpredictable uncertainties of the modern world without needing to control the outcome. When the rains of grief fall, they simply wash through our open space and enrich the soil of our empathy. When the winds of praise or criticism blow, they pass through our open lattice without finding any heavy, defensive ego structure to catch against or tear down. We are finally anchored not in the perfection of our performance, but in the infinite, indestructible roominess of our awareness. This profound internal space brings with it a new quality of light, a transparent and radiant clarity that infuses our relationships, our work, and the silent moments of our solitude. Because we are no longer spending 80% of our life force on maintaining a flawless, external glaze and hiding our inner vulnerabilities, we have an immense surplus of presence to offer to a starving world. When we sit across from a colleague, a partner, or a child, we are no longer listening through the distorted filter of our own performance anxiety. We are simply there, a solid, unblinking witness capable of holding their pain and their joy with the exact same boundless clemency we have learned to offer to ourselves. We become a natural sanctuary for others, not because we have all the answers or because we never falter, but because we are no longer afraid of being human in their presence. Our authenticity becomes a silent, infectious permission slip, inviting everyone who encounters us to drop their own exhausting armor, step off their pedestals, and breathe a long, collective sigh of absolute relief. As we stand on the threshold of this reclaimed life, looking back one last time at the brittle monument we used to be, we can hear the echoing resonance of the historical teacher's ultimate transmission to humanity, a final, urgent reminder delivered under a canopy of fading stars. You must be your own island, you must be your own refuge. There is no external refuge that can ever save you from the friction of your own mind. This is not a cold directive to isolate ourselves from the world, but a fierce, empowering declaration of our own inherent sovereignty. It is a reminder that the wholeness, the safety, and the unconditional love we have been trying to earn through a lifetime of hyper-optimized performance was never something that could be granted to us by a corporate title, a bank account, or the validation of society. It was already here, fully formed and waiting for us, buried directly beneath the very exhaustion we were trying so desperately to escape. Our true refuge has always been the vast, unpainted sky of our own awareness, a space that can never be broken, never be fraudulent, and never be hollow. The rain outside the window has finally begun to slow, its steady rhythmic drumming dissolving into the quiet, mist-shrouded murmurs of a city preparing for the dawn. The mechanical keyboards are silent now. The servers continue their low, indifferent hum, and the empty spaces on our calendars wait for us with an open, non-judgmental patience. The armor has been laid down on the floor, the clay has been broken open, and the sand has returned to the earth. We are left here in the stillness, breathing a breath that belongs entirely to the belly, feeling the heavy, honest weight of our bones resting deeply in the present moment, completely awake to the raw and unedited beauty of our own fragile, magnificent humanity. The world will ask us again tomorrow to put the mask back on, to step back onto the stage of performative excellence, and to prove our worth through the violence of perpetual striving. But as we sit here in the boundless sanctuary of our own skin, knowing that our wholeness was never dependent on the perfection of the glaze, a final, open question remains to reverberate through the quiet corridors of our remaining days. If you no longer have to pretend to be a monument to hold the world together, who are you finally free to become in the safety of your own collapse?